It's looking good so far. It looks like it's working. Yay. It says it's running on YouTube. Okay. All right, well, we'll get started then. Wow. Yeah. This is our 29th week in the book of Job, and now we're reaching near to the end. The first 2/3 of the book, Job faced many disasters, and he lamented them and cursed them, and his friends blamed him for hidden sins, saying he must have done something to deserve this. But then Job started perking up with the help of the Holy Spirit, and he made his friends angrier by refusing their advice. For the last 2 weeks, we studied Job's final speech in chapters 29 through 31. This is his legal finale. Job decided it was time to stop arguing with his friends and just ask God to make judgment. He didn't want to argue anymore. So these 3 chapters are his way of saying, I've had enough. In chapter 29, Job explained what his life was like before his disasters. He remembers the good old days. He starts by recalling how God was friendly to him in those months past, when his kids were alive and when everything he did was prospering. Job, he had respect from people because he was rich and wise and generous. He delivered the poor and the fatherless and the perishing. He helped the widows. He assisted the blind and the lame and the poor. He worked for justice in legal cases. Job crushed wicked oppressors and saved victims. You know, this sounds a lot like a shepherd, the way we have the shepherd described in the Bible, because in order to care for sheep, you have to attack wolves and bears. So it doesn't mean meek and mild, doesn't mean effeminate. It also includes strength to oppose enemies. So worldly wisdom and orderly philosophies, they do not line up well with our world. And the reason is because our world is fallen and cursed. And it's because we're foolish creatures who have very little understanding of truth. And God has purposes and plans that go far beyond us. We just can't even comprehend them. Now, just because we Calvinists say that God does everything for his own glory does not mean that God does nothing to help us. You see, this is the human tendency. We call it the zero-sum game. There's a mathematical model theory called a zero-sum game. It basically means that life is strictly competitive. It's the Darwinian model. In the Darwinian model, it's the survival of the fittest. If you survive, I die. And that has crept into our philosophical views and into our mind. Your initial thought, whenever you hear that someone else has gotten something good, your initial thought in your flesh is, I guess I can't have that then, because he got it. And that's not true, necessarily true. It's pessimistic and it's an illogical assumption. Your loss is my gain, or your gain is my loss, is not a true thing to think. God seeking his own glory is not a zero-sum game. When God gets glory, you get good too. It's how he set up the universe to work. So when his people give him glory, God helps them and blesses them. That's just the way the universe is set up to work. So chapter 30, though, it focuses on Job's present unhappiness. You know, even homeless thieves were mocking him as they walk by the dump and maybe dump off some of the junk they got in their thievery. They would mock him. That's how bad he had fallen. He was below homeless thieves. But now Job accuses the one who's really responsible. In chapter 30, verse 11, Job says, it is God who has broken me. And that's why people are attacking me, because God is attacking me. In the first few verses, Job talks about his physical woes, is probably some sort of a elephantiasis leprosy is what they call it, where your skin actually turns black or gray and lumpy and it hurts. It's just pretty nasty and it stinks. So Job, though, then complains, God doesn't even care. God is cruel to me. He doesn't even care about me. And Job ends that chapter by asking God, why did I do all these years of personal justice for the poor, and have you repaid me with destruction and pain? Why do you attack me when I was good? That's really the question that people ask. Why me? That's basically what Job is saying, is why me? For some people, the answer, why me, is because they're wicked. If you're wicked, you deserve what you're getting. So why me is a stupid question. Why me is because I'm wicked. That's why God's letting you be harmed. But for some people, that is not the answer. For Job, that is not the answer. God is gaining glory and simultaneously improving Job's character in the crucible of adversity. The problem is that you assume that if you're in pain, it's bad. Now, it is bad in a sense. It doesn't feel good, but it is doing good for you in some way. It's giving you the... You remember James, count it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, because it brings in you character. Pain makes character. A person who lives a painless life will never learn anything. If you're not forced to face your mortality, you never will. So Job just doesn't understand that there are good things happening in what he is suffering. So calling it an evil, it is an evil in a sense, but it is a good overall. God intends it for his good, not for his evil. So the last chapter, though, of Job's speech is chapter 31. And Job swears up and down that he has not committed any big sins. And he lists at least a dozen sins that he has not done in his oaths to God. Job denies lust, deceit, adultery, harming his workers, ignoring the poor, idolatry of money or stars, hating his enemies, hiding his sins, or harming the land. And he swears to God, asking that God would just judge him now. Don't want to wait anymore. Don't want to argue anymore. God, just tell me if I'm wrong. Kill me now. Or raise me up. One or the other. So he wants an immediate answer. Now, I also pointed out the strange ending, though. Because Job rests his case, and then he adds one more sin he didn't do. So a lot of scholars think that this was a scribal error, that the scribe was supposed to put it earlier. But I don't think so, and I showed you why. The last sin that he claims he didn't do was harming the land, and the land was not done wrong by him. But the reason I think he did this intentionally is because he was saying, Job, did not hide my sins like Adam did. Just a few verses earlier, Job said, I didn't hide my sins like Adam. And you know what happened? Adam and Eve, they were hiding in the trees after they sinned, hiding from Jesus who was walking in the garden. And then God cursed Adam, and God told Adam that the land will now produce weeds and thistles for you. So Job is comparing himself to Adam. God, my lands have not rebelled against me. I have not hidden my sins. But if I did, then of course you should curse me just like you cursed Adam. So I think that's why there's such a strange ending there. The general interpretation of God blessing groups for obedience or disobedience makes the history of nations easier to understand. Instead of thinking of God punishing you personally for your sins, consider that many of the harms we suffer are not because God is cursing you personally. It's because you're living in a group that is being cursed by God. So in other words, God's curses in the temporal realm aren't usually personal. There are exceptions. For example, in the book of Acts, Herod, I think it was Antipas, I can't remember, it was one of the Herods, basically pretended he was God. He said something and all the people said, it's the voice of a God. And he said, yes, it's the voice of a God. And God struck him immediately with worms, it says, and he died. So that's a case where immediately, that reminds me of those atheists. You see these atheists, they claim that God doesn't exist because I demand, God, you strike me down with lightning instantly. And if you don't, it proves you don't exist. And God doesn't usually strike them down. But if he did, it'd be kind of funny, actually. But he usually doesn't. However, he does judge groups. And if you look at our Facebook page, I posted a number of big excerpts, well, little excerpts, from a sermon by John Owen that's quite relevant to this, where John Owen talks about how the church suffers not only because it is sinful, but because it's in a nation that is sinful. And so when God punishes the nation, the church will suffer. And so that's often the case. That's the case I think we're in now. We're either suffering because the church is evil, or because the nation is evil, or both. Probably both in this case. So anyway, you might say, though, if God judges nations temporally, then why did God raise Assyria or Babylon to power when they have no righteousness at all? You see, usually God judges righteous groups. He judges his church the most. But he does judge nations. But your error is in thinking that God was raising Assyria and Babylon because he was blessing them. His making them world empires was not blessing them. It was just enabling them to get destroyed better. He used them to judge the church, and then you judge them. So they're just tools, is all they are, those evil empires. So he had no interest in Assyria and Babylon except using them to punish his people, to punish the church of the day. So the blessings on our Western civilization were not because the United States was a righteous nation, but because the churches or Christians in them created a godly influence. We had good ideas of justice and mercy and things like that. Not all of our ideas were good, but a lot of them were. And so God blessed our country. And now the blessing is being taken away because we're no longer just or merciful. So God does individually bless us, but those blessings are generally spiritual blessings, patience and love and mercy and your personal growth, as opposed to those he uses on nations. So we gain, though, even more spiritual blessings by being a part of the church, because the church is the bride of Christ. So in other words, you get cursed for the groups you hang out with, and you get blessed for the groups you hang out with. They have an impact on you. So if you hang out with bad people, when bad things happen to those bad people, you will likely be caught up in their curses. On the other hand, if you're in with good people, like the church, then you gain some blessings that you wouldn't otherwise have. So that's the way God works on earth. So that's our review. Now we're ready to start a completely new section of the book of Job. Are there any questions before we move on? Okay. Well, Job's friends have been silenced. They're no longer talking. And then Job gave his last speech, and now he's silent, so he's no longer talking. The friends gave up on convincing Job, and then Job rested his case with a long speech about his innocence and demanding that God give him an instant verdict. So for the next several chapters, though, we have an entirely new character by the name of Elihu. We'll start with Job 32, verses 1 through 5. The words of Job are ended, by the way. That's how chapter 31 ends. So these three men stopped answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then the wrath of Elihu, that reminds me of the movie The Wrath of Khan, but anyway. The son of Barachel the Buzite of the family of Ram was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his three friends his wrath was aroused because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. Now because they were years older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, his wrath was aroused. Now what's the thing you notice the most in those verses? He's an angry guy. Yeah. Now Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they were fixated on fixing Job. But they weren't the only people there for the debate. I told you early on that it was likely that when you've got rich guys, you've got servants around. So there's probably sort of a crowd around. You know, people bringing food and drinks to the rich guys as they debate. Who knows if they shared any with Job. But there's another guy there, at least one, and that's Elihu. And he's been sitting there the whole time, listening to everything. And all we know about him is that he's younger, and we know about his family, the son of Barachel, son of the Buzite, from the family of Ram. So we have a lineage for him. Now, he was sitting in the peanut gallery, you might say, and he decided to speak up. Since everyone else has gone quiet, he'll put in his 2 cents. Now, Elihu's name means God who is mine. So that's an interesting name. He's my God. And his father's name means blessings from God. So his father also has a good name. But whoever he is, the main point that we are supposed to know is that Elihu is angry. His wrath is aroused against all three friends and Job when the debate is over. Now this is one reason why, for the last 30 years of studying the book of Job, I believe that Elihu was a bad guy. Worse than Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar. He was a young, angry man, and he really attacks Job hard. And even up until 2 weeks ago, that was my opinion. In fact, if I go back and listen to the first couple of chapters, messages, I probably said Elihu was bad. And I've changed my mind. This is a rare thing, because I'm usually right. But I've changed my mind. So here's what's going on. I had one niggling doubt all along. For a very brief time, I owned a gigantic commentary set by Joseph Carroll. I pre-ordered the set because it was half price if you pre-ordered it. And I waited a year to get it. And I finally got it 1 week before I was supposed to move to Arizona. Everything was packed, and I got like 5 boxes in the mail. It's like a 30-volume set. And I didn't have time to read it, and I didn't have anywhere to put it. So I sold it really fast on eBay. But before I sold it, I looked at the volume on Elihu, or the section where Elihu starts talking, because I was curious to see if he was along with me, and most commentators believe Elihu was a bad guy. I'd say about 80% of them. And the reason is he's angry. But I looked at Joseph Carroll, and Joseph Carroll said Elihu was speaking for Jesus. And I thought, what? How could somebody, he spent his whole life studying the book of Job, how could he come up with this erroneous opinion? So I slammed it shut and I sold it. Well, I was still curious about it though. How could he believe that strange opinion that you rarely run into? And now, 5 years later, I've had time to study other commentaries and opinions, and I've discovered that I've changed my mind to agree with Joseph Carroll. And there are a few others who believe this, James Durham and the modern Anglican pastor Christopher Ash. So it's not a non-existent opinion, but it is rare. Most commentators hold my old view that Elihu was just a brash boor who crashed the party and shouted angrily at Job, and then God speaks and never mentions him again. And this is another reason why people think Elihu was bad, because God condemns the three friends and he reproves Job, but he says nothing about Elihu. And so you could take that as a tacit admission that Elihu wasn't even worth talking to. On the other hand, though, you could take that quite differently, that he hadn't said anything wrong. Okay? So I'm going to try to prove to you through all of this that Elihu is actually speaking the words of God, inspired in a way. I mean, obviously the words are inspired because the whole book is inspired. However, I've told you that even the lies of the friends are inspired. In other words, the Holy Spirit does not inspire the book writer to say everything that is right. He inspires the book writer to say everything that was said correctly. In other words, if the devil lies, the devil's correct lie is cited, even though it's a lie. You see what I mean? So it is inspired in that sense. But I think Elihu was inspired by the Holy Spirit. In other words, Elihu's speech is a prelude to God's speech. You'll also remember the problem, perhaps, that God's speech at the end of the book does not answer any of Job's questions, does it? He doesn't say, this is why I attacked you, there was this Satan guy, and I had a bet with him. God doesn't say any of that stuff. All God says is, I'm God and you're not. So he doesn't really answer any of Job's questions, but Elihu does. So I think that in a way, God used Elihu to reprove Job so that God cannot have to bother with that later. God's not directly going to say, oh, poor Job, I'm sorry I did that, and pat him on the head. No, God is still God, but he's going to use another guy, just like Nathan going to reprove David. Elihu understands correctly, I believe, what Job did wrong. Now, so we'll talk more about this. I got off my script here, but first of all, let's talk about Elihu being angry. This is why most of the church fathers thought that Elihu was a bad guy. Because in general, we have accepted this sort of a Stoic idea. Rome was very full of the idea called Stoicism, which is that emotion is bad and logic is good. Sort of like Mr. Spock in Star Trek. And in a way, that's true, but it wrongly says that feelings and emotions are all wrong or never useful, and that's not the case. In fact, Jesus was angry. If you remember, Jesus in his human form was angry in the temple, and he created a whip and drove out the money changers and then wouldn't let anybody back in. Okay, now that's angry. And the disciples said, zeal for his house has consumed him. They remembered the Old Testament passage. So being angry is not wrong. Being angry is wrong if you're angry for the wrong reasons. If you're angry because your pride has been hit, because somebody's commented sadly on the color of your shirt, that's wrong anger. That's proud anger. But if you're angry because God has been defamed, that's good anger. Okay? It's like us being angry about abortion. Of course we're angry about abortion. It's murder. Why shouldn't you be angry about it? Okay? So the fact that Elihu is angry is not necessarily proof that he is bad. Also, God gets angry. In Deuteronomy 9, chapter 8, Moses says, God's wrath burns against you, and he would have destroyed you if I hadn't interceded for you. God was really angry at the people of Israel. And then in Psalm 11, God is a just judge. God is angry with the wicked every day. So if God can be angry, anger itself is not wrong. You may possibly be angry sometime, and you might be right. Okay? You're right to be angry about injustice, for example. You're right to be angry about sin. It's worthy of anger. Okay? So it is not necessarily right to call Elihu evil because he was angry. It does say, though, 3 times how angry Elihu was. It kind of sounds like to us he was out of control angry, red in the face and all really super angry. But if you look closely at his anger, maybe it wasn't so bad as you believe. Let's look at this again. The first sentence says, "Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel the Buzite, of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job." Why? His wrath was aroused because Job justified himself rather than God. So he's angry because Job was making accusations about God that aren't true. And as I've shown you through the book so far, Job has made accusations against God that aren't true. They're totally wrong. So far, his anger is right. He's angry because he's defaming God. Job is defaming God. All right, so now let's go down to verses 3 through 5. "And against his 3 friends, Elihu's wrath was aroused, because they had found no answer and yet condemned Job." Okay, so far, in Elihu's opinion, the 3 friends haven't proven that Job did anything wrong. He recognizes that they're just speculating, just throwing darts at the board, hoping something will stick, like they do in the media these days. So that's why he's angry at the 3 friends. Also, go on, "Now because they were years older than him, Elihu waited to speak to Job. But when Elihu saw that there were no answers from the mouth of these 3 men, his wrath was aroused." So Elihu is angry because the 3 friends have totally failed at what they said they were going to do. They said they were going to fix Job, and they didn't do it. So these are all things that Elihu is right to be angry about. Okay, so maybe he is very angry, man, but he's angry for good reason. Notice here that even though Elihu's anger is stated twice, they're both against the 3 friends. He's angry at them because they improperly condemned him with no proof. They exaggerated and they lied about him, and yet they had no real answers. So Elihu's mad at Job for being overly righteous in his own eyes and accusing God. And he's angry at the friends for not fixing Job and accusing him of things falsely. He's right. And this is exactly what God does at the end. He reproves Job and he condemns the friends. So God is angry at those guys too. So Elihu is angry just like God is angry. Okay? So if you do a cursory, lazy reading of Elihu, you could say that Elihu was agreeing with Job's friends because he's attacking Job so harshly. But when we study it more closely, you'll see that Elihu is not attacking Job for any imagined sins or any past sins. Elihu focuses entirely on what Job said in his hearing. So he never says, "Job, you must have been wicked long ago." No, he never says that. He says, "Job, you are wicked now because you're accusing God." Okay, so that's the difference. One reason I thought he was wrong all those years is because he attacked Job. And so you go from the 3 friends attacking Job, and they're wrong. And then Elihu attacks Job. I just assumed he was wrong like they were wrong. But I don't think he is. I think he's right. There's one more opinion, though, that I found, mostly in charismatic websites and some Baptist churches. They actually teach that Elihu was Jesus Christ in the flesh, a Christophany. I'm not willing to say that, and I really doubt it. And here's some reasons why I don't find it convincing. First of all, they're careful to give us the lineage of this guy. He has a father, and he has a tribe that he's from. And he knows these 3 guys, and they've known him. So if he was a Christophany, he's apparently been living on earth for decades or centuries. So I don't think that works, being a Christophany. Also, although Jesus does appear many times in the Old Testament as a Christophany, he never spent a long time here rebuking somebody. He appeared to, say, Gideon in the flames and then went up into heaven. He appeared to Abram. They had a fairly long conversation, 3 guys, 2 angels and Jesus. And they have a fairly long time with Abraham, so he spent the day with Abraham. And then Abram tries to talk him into not destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. You remember that? That's the longest Christophany in the Bible, is Abraham. And Jesus was there for a few hours. Well, Elihu is going to speak for many chapters. And I just don't get the sense that it's Jesus himself. He never says anything like, I'm the glorious one, or makes any promises to Job like, I'm going to fix you. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't think he's a Christophany. But I do believe Elihu was inspired by God to reprove Job. And another reason for believing that, it can't be a Christophany because some of the ways he talks. Elihu talks like a young guy. He almost babbles. He almost stutters. He repeats himself. He keeps apologizing for being young. That's not the sort of thing Jesus does when he appears. Jesus doesn't apologize for being young. So I believe this is an example of inspiration where God uses a person in their normal personality. It's not like he possesses you like a demon and you mechanically write out or speak exactly what he tells you. No, God gives the man or woman the concepts and you speak it, you've still got an accent. If you're from some weird place, you've still got an accent when you talk. This guy talks like a young guy, and you'll see that. So this is another reason I don't believe it's a Christophany. So in short, there are 4 views of who Elihu is. One we automatically reject is the liberals, that he never even existed, and that some scribe just wrote him in because they thought there should be a period between Job ending and God beginning. So they had to put some filler in there to make the play work. We don't buy that. That's one view. The second view is the one that I used to hold and that most people hold, is that Elihu is a brash young man and he's just spouting off at Job because he got his chance now. He wants to release some of his anger. The third is that Elihu is Jesus incarnate, a Christophany, rebuking Job. And the fourth, that's my view now, and is the view of Joseph Carroll, James Durham, and Christopher Ash, is that Elihu was a good young man and God used him to rebuke Job for his wrong accusations about God. So that's what I'll be showing you over the next few weeks. I should mention one more factor about Elihu. I already mentioned it, but I'll give you a little more. It is significant that God does not reprove, rebuke, or even mention Elihu at the end of the book. He mentions everybody else, but he ignores Elihu. The problem is we don't know what that silence means. Some people take the silence to mean he was so useless, God didn't even mention him. And the other view is that what he said was right, and so God doesn't mention him. So now I'm taking that latter view. So let's start looking at his words then, rather than just his anger, in verses 6 through 9. So Elihu, the son of Barachel the Buzite, answered and said, I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid. Now, is that something Jesus would say? I don't think so. Therefore I was afraid, and I dared not declare my opinion to you. I said, age should speak first, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. So Elihu first says why he didn't speak earlier. He's trying to be respectful to his elders. Now there's something you don't see anymore. Now it's the young people who are shouting and the old people who are being quiet. Shows you how our society is reversed. No respect for elders. But he does say this in an exaggerated manner. And it might even be a little bit of slam, a little bit of his anger at the friends. Because he says, usually you find wisdom in old men. And what's the implication of that? We're not seeing any of it now, are we? So he's kind of a backhanded slam on these old guys. So Elihu is a young guy. Maybe he's in his 20s. I don't know. Maybe he's even a teenager. It's hard to say. You have, and I have run into, and I used to be one, a young guy very interested in theology, and they are often obtuse. In other words, we know a lot of theology, but we may say it poorly because we have no concept of social grace. I know what's true and you don't. I'm not going to tell you. So no grace in their speech. It can be insensitive. But after saying he kept silent while his elders argue, now Elihu says that the great men are not always wise. So if I was Eliphaz, Bildad, or Zophar, I wouldn't be feeling the love from Elihu at this point in his speech. So now verses 10 through 14. Therefore I say, listen to me, I will also declare my opinion. Indeed, I waited for your words, I listened to your reasonings while you searched out what to say. I paid close attention to you, and surely not one of you convinced Job or answered his words, lest you say, we have found wisdom, God will vanquish him, not man. Now he has not directed his words against me, so I will not answer him with your words. Here, Elihu is saying, I listened to all three of you men, and you didn't convince Job. And now you guys seem to be waiting for God to just kill him. But now I want to try. I'm taking a turn, and I will try to convince Job, but I will not use the same ideas you did. He's not going to take Eliphaz's, I had a vision, I had a dream, as proof that Job was wicked. That dream was from Satan. He's not going to take Zophar's view, or Bildad's view, the traditionalist view. The old guys said it's this way, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And he's not going to take Zophar's way, which is, I'm just going to beat you on the head with a noodle and insult you until you agree with me. So he's not taking any three of those paths. He has different views. Now verses 15 through 17. They are dismayed and answer no more. Words escape them. I have waited because they did not speak, because they stood still and answered no more. I will now answer my part. I will declare my opinion. So Elihu repeats himself again. You guys have given up. I waited. Now it's my turn to give my opinion. You see what I mean about him just sort of repeating himself over and over? It's a sign of insecurity. When you're young and you're speaking in front of important people, your tongue kind of gets tied and you apologize over and over. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you stop talking. So I really think this shows that Elihu was insecure. Verses 18 through 20. I am full of words. The spirit within me compels me. Indeed, my belly is like wine that has no vent. It is ready to burst like new wineskins. I must speak. I must find relief. I must open my lips and answer. Okay, he's starting to babble a little bit. He's not very confident, and he's nervous about lecturing older men. And he's tripping himself up trying to explain himself. He basically says, if I don't open my mouth, I'm going to burst like a balloon. Jeremiah says something kind of like that in Isaiah. I have to give the prophecy because it's welling up inside of me. He's certainly no Cicero at any rate. Now verses 21 and 22. Let me not, I pray, show partiality to anyone, nor let me flatter any man, for I do not know how to flatter, else my Maker would soon take me away. Now this is kind of funny, I think. He doesn't flatter any man. What he means is, I'm about to blast you guys to smithereens, but I won't show partiality while I'm doing it. I'm going to wreck your philosophies. I'm going to show you that you're idiots, but I'll try to be nice about it. I think that's what he's saying here. I don't think he's being arrogant. I think he really believes and that he really is representing God. So that's why even though he is not confident in himself, he is confident in what he has to say. He got some kind of revelation from God and he understands it and he's going to present it now. And he credits God with these ideas. He doesn't say, I'm smarter than you older guys. He just says, God has inspired me, is what he's saying. Now, if I'm right that Elihu was sent by God to reprove Job and his friends, I'm still aware that God is letting this young guy speak with his own words. He's not possessing Elihu and making him speak these words, because God himself wouldn't speak that way. He's not having an eloquent tongue. It reminds me of Moses. You remember Moses saying, I can't talk. I don't talk too good. Well, he could have talked. Even if he didn't talk too good, he could have talked. But God had mercy and gave him Aaron to do the talking, since he didn't want to do it. But in this case, he's just going to let Elihu do it. And in a sense, that's good, because Elihu's doing what God wants. It reminds me of Jesus saying, out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, you have perfected praise. That's in Matthew chapter 21, and that's a quote from Psalm 8. And also in 1 Corinthians 1:27, what does Paul say? God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God chooses the weak things of the world to confound the things that are mighty. In other words, this is an example of God using a weak tool to do something good. It's kind of like us. I mean, if God uses me, he's using a weak tool. And so he gets the glory if something good comes out of it, because I'm just a weak tool. And that would be the case for probably all of us. We're all weak tools, and God gets more glory out of weak things. This is an example of why God uses people rather than angels. God could have sent an angel to talk to Job, and that would have been maybe more convincing. You'd sort of accept what angels say. Although, if you think about it, it could be an evil angel. So, God prefers to use people than to directly intervene. So now let's go to chapter 33. We'll just do the first half of the chapter. It's a long one. Verses 1 through 7. Now he really stops babbling and gets more to the point. Please, Job, hear my speech and listen to all my words. Now I open my mouth. My tongue speaks in my mouth. My words come from my upright heart. My lips utter pure knowledge. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. If you can answer me, set your words in order before me, and take your stand. Truly, I am as your spokesman before God. I also have been formed out of clay. Surely no fear of me will terrify you, nor will my hand be heavy on you. Now there's several important ideas here presented by Elihu. First of all, he's polite. He asks Job to listen to his words. He says he's an upright person and that the Holy Spirit has spoken to him. He even claims to be a spokesman for God. Now what's this all about? This would be blatant arrogance if it was not true. This is another reason why I think Elihu was sent from God. It's sort of like if you remember the Josh McDowell books, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. When you talk about Jesus, Jesus claims to be the Son of God, right? So either Jesus is telling the truth, and he is the Son of God, or he's a liar, or he's crazy. Okay, those are basically the three options you've got. Well, that's the same thing we have to say about Elihu. Either he's lying, and he's not a spokesman from God, or he's crazy, and he thinks he's a spokesman, and he isn't, or, I think I missed one, but it doesn't matter. You see my point. He's saying that he is a spokesman for God, so either he's lying or he's telling the truth. And so we have to decide which it is. Also, remember, how often did Job say, I want a mediator? Job kept saying, I can't respond to God because he'll terrify me. If I see God, I'm just going to fall down like a puddle of goo. So I need a human mediator. And so what does God send him? A human mediator. The trouble for Job is, Job assumed that if he got his human mediator would help him present his good case to God. The problem is his human mediator shows up and says, Job, you're being bad. Okay? So he is mediating for God. He is a human. He won't terrify Job. However, he is mediating in a way Job didn't expect. Job expected to get patted on the head and told it was all right. And instead, he's getting, bad boy. So I believe Elihu is a mediator for God. If you accept Elihu as a messenger from God, then you may learn a lot more about God's reply to Job, because God spoke through this young guy for a few chapters before he spoke for himself. And it does not answer all of Job's questions, but it does answer many of them. So I think it makes the whole book of Job more satisfying to find some answers. We've been missing the answers because we said Elihu was bad and we've ignored him. Okay? I think that you get a whole different view of the book by seeing it this way. Yes?
I was going to say, Elihu's speeches sound like they're coming from an act of humility versus the other three friends came from an act of pridefulness. You don't hear that same prideful boasting that they did in the previous chapters.
That's true. If you couldn't hear that on camera, the statement was, you can see that Elihu is acting humbly, even though the other friends were acting proudly. So there's a very different attitude in Elihu than you saw in the friends. And so there's at least then a greater possibility that he's a good guy and not a bad guy. Yeah. Yes?
Sometimes when someone tells you something, that they do it in a gentle way than someone that's in your face, and it's like, like pounding at you. You're not going to listen to the pounding because that's just going to put you on the defensive.
Right.
But if you listen to the humbleness and the quietness of what they're trying to say, that's going to reach you more. And that's what Elihu is doing here.
Yeah, that's correct. When people are yelling at you, he's already outnumbered. He was outnumbered 3-1. Now it's kind of 4-1, but those three guys were yelling at him. And when somebody's yelling at you, you shut down. You put up your defenses and you won't listen to them very well. So someone coming to you with more gentleness may make you more open to the truth. Now, Elihu will become harsh against Job. but he's harsh about the things Job did and not about Job himself per se. He explains to Job, you need to fix this. So I think it's a strong rebuke. What do you call it, tough love? I think you're going to see tough love from Elihu here. Okay, so verses 8 through 11. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words, saying, I am pure, without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no iniquity in me. Yet God finds occasion against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks. He watches all my paths. So now Elihu is correctly recounting things that Job has said, not just once, but repeatedly. However, the first part is a little tricky, and this is one reason why people think he was a bad guy. Because Elihu says that Job said that he was pure and without sin, innocent and without iniquity. And that's not exactly true in the sense of the exact Hebrew words. In other words, Job used the words, let's see, I've got them in, here it is. Elihu says that Job said, he used the words Zach, Pesa, Hop, and Awan. Okay, so that's what Elihu says were Job's words, pure, innocent, didn't sin. The words Job actually used, he only used one of those words out of those four. And so the skeptics or the people who dislike Elihu say, see, Elihu's lying. He's putting Job's words in Job's mouth that he didn't really say. But that in itself is a little misleading because those words are all synonyms. So let's use this example. Let's say that I say, or Mike Bibby tells me, I'm really handsome, aren't I? And so I tell other people, Mike Bibby told me he's a good-looking guy. Am I lying? Okay, yes, maybe that wasn't a good example. But good-looking is the same as handsome. Right. So I don't think this is proof that Elihu's lying. My guess is that maybe Elihu can't remember exactly the word Job used. He just remembered that Job said, I'm innocent. No, he didn't use the word Zach. He used some other word. But I don't think it makes a difference. The fact is, Job has said over and over again, I'm innocent. Now, we know for a fact that he was a sinner. We don't know what sins he had committed. We do know that he'd made sacrifices for those sins. But I don't think Elihu is attacking him for saying that he hadn't been forgiven. No, I think Elihu is saying, you keep calling yourself pure. You haven't been pure since you opened your mouth. Ever since Job started talking in Job chapter 3, the first two sentences he used were good. Remember, his first reactions to the disasters, I came from my mother's womb, I'll return there, blessed be the name of the Lord. Good. And the second time, when his wife told him to curse God and die, you speak like a foolish woman. Should I not serve God in good and bad times? Good. But when he gets to chapter 3, he curses everything. After he had sat around for a while and his friends showed up and they were sneering at him and he gave up and he started cursing not God, but the creation, the sun, the moon, the dirt, the animals, everything getting time, birthdays. What Elihu is saying is you claim to be innocent and maybe you were, but you're not anymore. Okay, so that's the difference. If Elihu is speaking on behalf of God, maybe God is saying that Job has overestimated his righteousness. You could get that impression. We know that Job was righteous. God said it to Satan. Have you not seen my servant Job? He's the most righteous guy on earth. How righteous is the most righteous guy on earth? Filthy rags. Remember, that's what Isaiah tells you. That's how good your righteousness is. If you're the most righteous guy on earth, if you're Mother Teresa or somebody who's really righteous, you're still filthy rags in God's sight. Okay? So maybe God is a little bit angry that Job keeps declaring his innocence. He's overstating the case. You know how you get to do that? You start your argument and you get more and more exaggerated on how right you are, when really you're not all that sure, but you still want to win. But what about the fact that God said that Job was blameless? This is an important question. In fact, it might be the most important question in the whole speech of Elihu. That's because Job's friends accused Job of previous sins, and that's why he's being punished. Elihu never accuses Job of prior sins. Elihu is entirely focused on Job's speeches, not the life of Job before. In other words, Job is not taking the same accusatory frame of the three friends that Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar did. Elihu is saying, Job, I don't know anything about your past. I'm a young guy. You're old. I don't remember when you were a young guy. I wasn't even born yet. But you are sinning now. You are accusing God of wrong things. Let me show you where you've gone astray. Okay? So that's the point now. Now, you all recognize that when you're in a time of stress and trauma, your brain gets messed up. You don't react good. You generally react badly because you're all stressed out. Your hormones and your adrenaline's all going off. And Job is suffering a painful disease, and he's groaning, and he's lost everything. So he's depressed and despairing, and he's struggling for life, and people are sitting there attacking him, and the devil is torturing him. So Job cracks socially and emotionally and mentally. And you can see that Job has changed radically, and not all the change is good. He is learning some things, but he's also calling God his enemy. When you're feeling really low, it is very easy to go wrong and even convince yourself that you're right, even if you're wrong. It's quite possible that Job is truly believing that he's innocent. He used to be very innocent, and maybe he's comparing himself to the rest of men. I'm really innocent compared to other guys. And yet, he was God's friend on earth, like Moses. Now he's lost his friend, God, and he convinces himself that he was pure, so God must be wrong. And in that, he's wrong. He's incorrect. So now, verse 11, it contains exact quotes of Job's words, but now finish with verses 12 and 13. This is how we'll end today. Look, in this you are not righteous. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? For God does not give an accounting of any of his words. Now I'm going to save this for next week. We'll start again with this next week. But I want you to see how Elihu is approaching this. He is not attacking Job. He is defending God. Now, by defending God, he is attacking Job. But that's not his purpose. His purpose is to defend God. Elihu seems to know that inside. Job, who is a generally righteous man, knows, or should know, that it's wrong to accuse God. What are you doing, Job? Wake up. Pull yourself together. God is not your slave to be rebuked. You are his. And this is exactly what God will do in the last chapters of the book. God is not going to make a line-by-line account of what he did to prove him right to you. God is above that. You're God's servant. He's not your servant. So we'll pick up there next week and talk more about Job's relationship to God. Are there any questions or observations?
I was just going to say, Elihu totally reminds me, we watched the Food Project, and you all remember that young kid that was like, he's like a boy, he's like 12, and he's a genius. And
Oh, yeah.
He just has everything scripturally so sound in his words, and that's kind of how Elihu's reminding me that, God has given him, has inspired him to give these words to Job. And I'm not really angry. It's not wrong, it's right words.
Right. Yes, Elihu is not angry. Well, he is angry at Job for being wrong. He's not angry at Job because he's a bad guy.
Right.
He wants to help straighten him out.
I guess what I'm saying, it doesn't really matter what age you are. Wisdom
Right.
doesn't necessarily come with age. You can be young and be wise.
Yeah, well, as one great example of being young and wise is Jesus. You remember him in the temple, and everyone thought how wise he was. And also David. He was anointed as king when he was a little guy, a little squirt taking care of the sheep. So young people can be righteous. It doesn't happen real often, but it is wonderful when it does happen.
And also, even if you know every word of the Bible from the beginning to the first verse to the last verse, that doesn't mean you're wise.
Right? Yes, there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom.
You know, what you've read.
Did you know that Joseph Stalin had the New Testament memorized? He was in school to be a pastor before, and he memorized the New Testament. And he was a wicked man.
Some people are really dogmatic, and I'm right. You know, I'm right. No matter what you say, no matter what you point out to me, you're wrong.
Right.
Everybody else is wrong, and they're always right.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, you know, and God is going to use who he's going to use to get his word across through the people and for his church. And that's what we have to remember, that, you know, and I believe God brings people in our lives when we need them.
Yes.
And when we don't need them anymore, they're
Yes.
not there.
God does bring people into our lives at the right time. That's how he uses tools to get glory. Weak tools, and that's one of the ways God uses people in the church. to help. But I'm really excited about this because since I've changed my mind, we talk about worldview. Worldview is like wearing glasses, sunglasses. If you're wearing yellow sunglasses, the whole world looks a little yellow. So by seeing Elihu as wrong all these years, I didn't pay any attention to him. I ignored him. But now seeing him as being inspired by God to speak to Job, it makes these chapters a lot more important and more interesting. And it also means that I think God did answer Job in ways more than we thought he did. Okay, so I think that'll help us a lot. Okay, well that'll, you have another comment, yes?
You're talking about Stalin, and going to a seminar when he wrote his book on the doctrines of communism. He dedicated it to Darwin as he praised Darwin, saying, "Finally, you show me how to destroy God."
Huh.
And that was, he said, that was the only thing holding me back, was that I couldn't destroy God. And Darwin showed me how.
So Stalin turned because of Darwinism to destroy God. That's very, very interesting. Okay, so we'll come back to Elihu next week, and we'll probably be on him for a few weeks. And we'll turn this off. We'll be back for our worship service in 40 minutes, and we do have this thing working, so hopefully we'll still have it working